at what has happened in the Gambia, look at what happened in Uzbekistan, look at what happened in Yemen, and look at what is happening in the United States. You cannot, if you look at the data dispassionately, I don't know what are the conclusion that you can come to. That there were 11 children who were killed in Jammu because of poor quality medicine. Nothing ever came out of it. Yes, there's a company in Gujarat that sold azithromycin. This was another medicine that was used in COVID. Their drug, the drug inspector found out, was 12.5% of what was in the label. So the label said 200 milligrams, right? It had 12 to 25 milligrams of that drug. This incident with the eye drops has opened up a completely new door where I think the consequences of this for the Indian industry are going to be severe.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Table Talk. I am Jyotsna, and before I move ahead, a quick reminder to share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jyotsna Mohan. Well, on the show today, he is the whistleblower who exposed malpractices in India's biggest drug maker, Ranbaxy. Well, joining me on the show today is Mr. Dinesh Thakur, along with co-author Prashant Reddy. He has authored a book called The Truth Pill that looks into malpractices in the pharma industry. Well, he joins me today to speak about what he has learned and where India's drug regulations stand. Recently, the US has reported 3 deaths that have been linked to eye drops that have been imported from India. This is not the first instance that Indian drugs that have been sent abroad are in the eye of a storm. Earlier in Gambia, 66 children had passed away after having a cough syrup manufactured in India. Before that, there have been deaths in Uzbekistan, 18 deaths, also due to a cough syrup. And of course, we've also heard of an incident in Jammu where at least 11 to 12 children passed away after also having a cough. Joining me on the show today is Dinesh Thakur to look into recent incident of the eye drops in the US, the repercussions for India on the whole, and what really are the loopholes in pharma regulations in the country and whether the regulations need to be regulated. Mr. Thakur, thank you so much for joining me today. Are we now, some sort of habitual offenders in a sense, or we wouldn't like to acknowledge that?
I think that's the issue. I don't think we would want to acknowledge that, right? If you look at data dispassionately and, take our ego out of it and just look at the data, right? Look at what has happened in the Gambia, look at what happened in Uzbekistan, look at what happened in Yemen, and look at what is happening in the United States. You cannot, if you look at the data dispassionately, I don't know what are the conclusion that you can come to. Whether you want to acknowledge that is a different story, because then, egos come into the picture, opinions come into the picture and all that kind of stuff. I'm just looking purely at the data and say, look, this is what the data is. And sadly, the issue is not the fact that these are, things that are making us look bad. If you read the prologue of our book, right, the first chapter itself, we recount 5 incidents since we became, independent in 1947, where people have died because of diethylene glycol poisoning. Most recently in 2019, I would be hard pressed to actually see any kind of meaningful reporting in the news media in India acknowledging the fact that there were 11 children who were killed in Jammu because of poor quality medicine. Nothing ever came out of it. I mean, the police haven't even filed a charge sheet in that case so far. It's 2 years now. 2019 December is this incident. It's just that we don't pay attention to these things. And what's worse is that it's not just that we don't pay attention to it, we just don't understand the impact of what this is doing to us. And you saw during COVID, right? I think, people who had a lot of money were running around trying to find hospital beds. They were calling all of their connections, the ministries, the bureaucrats, the well-heeled people saying, can you please get us, access to a hospital? I mean, it's so horrific images of a wife trying to resuscitate husband in an auto rickshaw. Why does it happen, right? And unless it happens to me and my family, I honestly don't care. Because in India, we have a lot bigger problems. We can't feed our people. We can't employ them. And medicine is something we only talk about when it affects me, like my family, my children. It's only then we worry about medicine or access to medicine. If it happens to somebody else and we see this, we watch Tamasha on the TV for a little while, we have some debates on TV, and then we just go back to doing our own thing. That's the reality of our life. I mean, look, I know this is not easy to say, but we have to acknowledge it. Take me out of the picture, look at the data. Okay, I'm a spokesperson. Take me out of the picture because I've been accused of doing worse things for India, being an anti-national, being against the industry. Take me out of the picture, right? Look at the data and tell me if you disagree with a reasonable conclusion that I'm drawing.
So, the loopholes then, when it comes to regulations in the pharma industry, there's not just one place where the loophole is, right? There are multiple, like, the fact that there's no adequate punishment, the fact that there's licensing issue. Where does it all begin?
It begins with the fact that, there's a funny sort of, anecdote that there is, right? So, the former health secretary, Keshav Desiraju, who passed away, a few years ago, he used to say that when we write laws and when we write rules and statutes, we write in such a way that we always create loopholes for those laws. It's by design, right? If you write regulation in such a way that it's open to interpretation, then you cannot blame vested parties from taking advantage of those loopholes, right? With the eye drops incident in the United States, where we now have an incident of a carbapenem-resistant bacteria in this country, which I think that it's going to be consequences for us. It's not visible right now, but there is going to be consequence for us. Until this time, the US FDA was walking a very fine line, right? Whenever they found problems with the manufacturing facilities in India, they would penalize them to the extent of basically saying you cannot export to this country. There were even in Ranbaxy's case, where the company pled guilty to 7 counts of criminal felony. You know what the penalty was? Money. Nobody went to jail. The company paid $500 million in penalties to the US government. But guess what? Nobody went to jail for that. The funny part is the same people who killed people in Africa with poor quality medicine are sent to jail because they defrauded people. The Singh family, the Singh brothers are sitting in the jail basically because they took money away. So money seems to be more of a reason to punish people than the fact that you intentionally try and poison people. Having said that, what I'm trying to tell you is this: even in advanced countries like the United States, the regulators walk a very fine line between saying, look, if you take more punitive measures, we are going to create drug shortages, right? But I don't think that the US FDA has that benefit anymore. This incident with the eye drops has opened up a completely new door where I think the consequences of this for the Indian industry are going to be severe. We are not seeing it right now. I think it's going to take some time for them to be able to react to it, but this is not good for us. Coming back to what we're talking about in India, right? So I think the point here I'm trying to make here is that it all begins with regulation. It all begins with the way that we write our laws. In the Indian law, and we recount this in that book, in 2001, when the Schedule M, which was equivalent to the US regulation CFR 211, when it was revised, one of the requirements that was inserted in the regulation said that if you're manufacturing sterile products, right, the medicines can come in different forms, different dosages, right? You have an oral dosage of medicine that you take by your mouth. And then there are what are called sterile products, injectables, eye drops and things like that, where if you get bacteria in them, the effect is immediate because they're injected in your body. Unlike a medicine that actually goes into your stomach, gets all absorbed in your gut and becomes bioavailable, sterile products are a lot more susceptible to bacterial infection. So when the regulations were written in 2001, one of the regulation that was put in there was saying that if you are running a sterile manufacturing facility, you have to decontaminate, and there were certain procedures written on how to decontaminate and make sure that the facility is sterile. Under industry's pressure, those provisions were taken out of a regulation, and we document this in our book. So one of the things that happens is that if you're manufacturing sterile products, you use steam. High temperature steam kills most of the pathogens and microorganisms in the manufacturing facility. So think about this: you have steel tanks, you have pipes, right? That are connecting them. That's where the chemical reaction is happening. That's how you make the product. Over a period of time, if you don't clean this with bleach and steam, you will have pathogens developing. This is not unique to India. It happens all the time. But the way that we get around that is we run bleach through those pipes, we run steam through those pipes, and make sure that there is no contamination, there's no bacteria, there's no pathogens. This was inserted into Schedule M of our Drugs and Cosmetics Act as a proposal. And under industry's pressure in 2001, and this is documented in a question to the parliament, why this was taken out. This was removed because the industry said it's too expensive for us to be able to comply with this requirement. What you're seeing in the US right now is a consequence of that. Now, you ask me, why do these things happen? I just gave you an example. It took 22 years for it to manifest in a highly regulated environment in the United States. Do you honestly think that doesn't happen in India? Remdesivir, which was a drug that was touted as a miracle cure for people with COVID, in Bihar, made by a company in Gujarat, was responsible for killing people because it was contaminated during COVID. An injection of remdesivir. This was widely reported. There's a long article in the Mint. How many people really know about that? That our drug companies made a contaminated product that was injected into people, and because it was contaminated and not tested properly, it killed people in Bihar. And it's documented and causally established related to the remdesivir product. Now you tell me, what was the consequence to that company for killing people?
So is the pushback because it takes away from this whole image we have of the home of affordable generic drug?
Yes, it does. Because look, in the 75 years of us being independent, tell me which other industry that we can tell that actually has manufacturing capacity. I'm not talking about services, right? IT services. Tell me one industry that is globally recognized as has a manufacturing base in India. Which one is that? It's pharmaceuticals. That's the only success story we have. And we'll do everything possible to try and protect that.
So, in your book, you've also, you've gone from, independence to now. What really, in terms of your research through the truth pill, what are the changes that you've seen in terms of regulations over the decades?
So, as I said to you, I gave you an example of what happened in 2001, right? I think that what has happened is successively we've diluted down whatever little, regulatory capacity we had. And when we think about generic drugs, right? So generic drugs are the ones that are off patent, right? So these are essentially these medicines have run their patent out, and they're made by many different manufacturers. And the way that we know that that generic drug works in a similar manner to the original innovator drug is through a test called bioequivalence. Basically, it says that the way that your body reacts to that medicine has to be within a certain range. Like in the United States, they give you a range of plus or minus 10%. So, for example, if I take a pill, I have a headache, I take a pill, and the amount of medicine in that pill, when I take it, it dissolves in your stomach and gets into my bloodstream, has to be a certain concentration. And you measure that by drawing blood, and you test it in the lab and say how much of the medicine is in the blood. In the United States, that goes from 90 to 110% of the labeled amount. So you go buy a drug, you buy Crocin. It says Crocin on the strip that they sell you. It says Crocin 250 milligrams IP or 500 milligrams IP, right? That is the strength of that particular product. The expectation is that when it goes into your stomach, when it dissolves in your bloodstream, you will have 250 or 500 milligrams of that drug, right? In the United States and in Europe, the regulation is that it can be plus or minus 10%. So if it's a 500 milligrams, you could have 450 on one end and to 550 on the other end, 10% variation. The statutory body, which is called the Drugs Technically Advisory Board, which is basically a membership of the advisory board company advising the the DCGI, the CDSCO, which is our regulator. When they looked at this, they said, well, you know what, 10% is too tight, but we'll make it 30%. So in India, in the regulations written that a 500 milligram Crocin paracetamol can vary from 350 to 650 for a 500 milligram tab. Okay, that's one aspect of it. So we dilute our regulations intentionally. The second thing that the DTAB does is that it says that if we find out that, and the only way we find this out is our regulation says that each state has to have a cadre of drug inspectors who go buy medicine from the market, get it tested in the laboratory. This is how we found out that remdesivir was contaminated in Bihar, and then report that back to the state so that the state can take action on it, right? And the rules that the Drug Technical Advisory Board framed basically said that if you find out that this drug fails even our loose criteria, remember we went from 10 to 30, and even if it's beyond 30, the directions that they have given inspectors is do not prosecute. It says judiciously address administratively such incidents. That is the reason why even when we document instances of this, there's a company in Gujarat that sold azithromycin. This was another medicine that was used in COVID, but it's a highly potent antibiotic that's used for upper respiratory infections. So we have bad throat and then cough and esophagus infections. Their drug, the drug inspector found out, was 12.5% of what was in the label. So the label said 200 milligrams, right? It had 25 milligrams of that drug in it. Now imagine if you're suffering with a bad infection and your doctors prescribed you this medicine, and you've gotten it, and you've taken it. Do you think the medicine's going to help with 12.5% of what is supposed to be on the label? And guess what the punishment this company got? Nothing. I mean, basically the judge said, go stand in the corner there until I rise from the court. The regulations are written in such a way that basically tell the judges, do not prosecute. The inspectors, not the judges. Judges have to read the law. The problem is that the judges also don't read the law. The law is written in such a way that if you find a manufacturer making substandard drug, you're supposed to penalize them with 1 year of prison time and 20,000 rupees of penalty. And if you don't do that, you have to justify in your order why you're not doing that. But what happens is the inspectors go up when you're making arguments again in front of the judge and say, well, look at our advisory from our national regulator. They said that don't prosecute unless it's really, really, really bad. Use administrative procedures. So what is the judge going to do?
With this leniency, then in terms of the punishment, and I've read this, even when it's come to the cough syrups, does this then embolden more factories, these little factories to mushroom everywhere, knowing that, they can just get away at the end of the day?
They have. I mean, if you look at our small and medium SME sector within India for drug manufacturing, these are essentially things that are run out of people's homes and sheds with control. Remember, government procurements for health the decisions are made at the state level, right? Individual state ministers of health have the discretion to spend the money that they want to. This is where political patronage comes in. They basically go and buy, medicines that are distributed as a part of the government programs, made from these small and medium enterprises that have absolutely no control. There is an element of corruption. There is an element of political economy built into it, because other than the national procurement, like central government health scheme, railways, and Indian Army, most of the procurement is done at the state level. I'm not saying all states do it. The Tamil Nadu State Medicines Procurement Corporation is actually very well run. So is Kerala. And if there's a problem, you never, go back and penalize them. And if people like me call it out, I'm becoming an anti-national.
Where does the buck stop, or the buck doesn't stop actually?
The buck stops when we, the people of India, start demanding accountability, right? When was the last time that you saw there was a sustained campaign on right to, what is happening in Rajasthan right now with the right to health, at least is a step forward. Where was the last time when you saw a sustained nationwide campaign around health? Yes, we made an issue. We had a lot of discussions during COVID. But what do we talk about? Look at, can you take a survey of the conversation that is happening right now in our media and find me a conversation around health other than the Right to Health program in Rajasthan?
So where does it leave the common man? I mean, you spoke in your previous question about how medications, we don't really know what we are buying, especially, I guess, over the ones that we buy over the counter.
The issue is more complex than that. Just the fact is that, look, people like you and me who live in cities, right? We have access to medicine, meaning that we can go to a big hospital. We have good doctors that we can look at. Look at rural India. 80% of our population doesn't have access to a primary health center, right? Unlike the rest of the world, when people fall sick, they go see a doctor. When people in India, rural India, fall sick, they go to a medical store and says, "Bhaiya kuch de de, sir dard ho raha hai." Right? Medicine is our first line of defense when we fall sick. And unless we address this issue of access to medicine, access to good quality medicine, we are not going to be able to look at health outcomes in a proper manner. The question you're asking me is, where does this end? It ends when we start demanding better accountability. And that is the reason we wrote this book. Look, it's a 500-page book, and we don't even address some other issues related to pricing because it's just, nobody would read a book like that. We had to limit what we could do and focus primarily on quality. The point is this, the point is that there was nothing in our current literature that at least told people what the problems are. Right? To get people to mobilize, you have to be able to make a compelling argument on the point that you are trying to get to. And that could only be done in a book. There's no other way that we could do it. And that's the reason why we wrote the book. And we're hoping that, I know it's a data-heavy book. We've done a lot of research. We collect a lot of data. And it's hard to read sometimes because it's not fiction, right? But it reads like a fiction, right? But it's not fiction. It's a non-fiction book. It talks about the fact that in a well-governed state like Tamil Nadu, and I'm saying this because I know I've looked at the Tamil Nadu State Medicines Procurement Corporation. They run very well. We recount an instance of a company in Tamil Nadu that basically substituted a different medicine for what is written on the label for diabetes. You remember what happens in diabetes, right? Diabetes is that your body is not producing enough insulin. In this particular situation, the drug that was labeled was 9,000 rupees a kilogram of raw material. Okay, that's what the cost of the raw material was. What they put in the tablet was 1,900 rupees. Imagine the difference between those two. 9,000 rupees a kilogram versus 1,900 rupees a kilogram. That's how they made the drug. But the problem is not that. The problem is not money. The problem is the substitution actually doesn't get your blood sugar in control in the time it is required. So the doctor doesn't know. The doctor says, take this medicine before you eat. Because you know that the moment you eat, your blood sugar levels rise in your body, right? You eat carbs, you eat rice, you eat chapati, your blood sugars rise what the stomach digests that, sugar levels rise, and you have to have the medicine to be able to control that, right? If the medicine that is being given to you doesn't act within the specified time period, guess what's going to happen to a diabetic? We don't even have systems in the country to actually tell us how many adverse events people suffered because of Covaxin and Covishield. There is some data, right? It's only when there were deaths. Look at the incidence and the frequency of adverse events, and look at the incidence and the frequency of adverse events in India. Our reporting is less than 10%. I can interpret the data in two ways, right? I can say our vaccines are so great that only 10% of the people have adverse events. That's a valid interpretation. The other interpretation is we don't collect good data. Now, you live in India. I was born and raised in India. Which one of these two explanations makes sense to you? Whether it comes to economic data, whether it comes to mortality data, whether it comes to any kind of data, right? Our systems aren't good enough to be able to capture these things in a way that inform policy making. We make policy based on gut.
On a separate note, have you flagged out any ingredients specifically, that in the medicines, or whether it is eye drops or whatever we've been listening and
so to the extent that we could, right? I mean, writing a book like this, we had to collect a lot of data, and a lot of data came from. So in India, what happens is, I told you, right, the way that we think about quality is very different than the way the rest of the world thinks about quality. The way the rest of the world thinks about quality is quality by design. So they build quality into the manufacturing process. Every step of the manufacturing process has a measurement that says if you pass this control, then you practice of quality. The way that our laws are written, we measure quality in the end product. So our way of measuring quality is once a product gets to the market. Among the Union of India, there's only 3 states that actually publish this data. And even that, after our book came out, they've stopped doing that because we got that data to make our argument. Gujarat used to do it, Karnataka used to do it, and Kerala used to do it. They put this information into what is called the excellent database. So everything that the conclusions that we draw from the data is just from these 3 states, which is obviously, look, India is a much bigger country, right? But we don't have access to data.
Did you find a lot of resistance when your book came out? What was the reaction?
So we got 2 threats from the national regulator. We got 2 legal notices. One, when the Gambia situation broke, it was concurrent with when the book came out. Our book launch was October 4th or something like that, and the Gambia situation happened around that time. And so Prashant, my co-author, and I, when we interviewed, when we called out, what we did, we got the first legal notice from the Ministry of Health and the Central Drug Regulator, which responded to that. And then a few weeks later, we got another, threatening legal letter. We also responded to that, and after that, it stopped. Now I don't know whether they decided to do anything about it.
So there's one clarity I wanted, just for the common people. There is a difference, isn't there, between adulteration of products and substandard quality and the impact?
Right. What we call not of standard quality and what is called adulterated in the United States are very different, right? In the US, a definition of adulterated is if you don't follow the process. Our definition of a substandard, which is not a standard quality, is what is in the market. What you're saying is, what is the difference between a counterfeit drug and an adulterated drug? That is the question you're asking. Counterfeit is when you go buy a Louis Vuitton bag, right? And you pay $1,800 for it. But then you walk down, Canal Street in New York, and a similar looking bag is available for $200, right? So somebody made a copy of that. It's not the original, and is selling it to you really cheap, right? That is counterfeiting a product. Adulteration is when you make a product, but you comply with the quality of that product, right? Adulteration is when the Maggie situation. Remember, we had a situation with Maggie several years ago, and they said that the quality. There was one particular ingredient in that they said that that was off, and Nestle had to go back into the court and prove and all that. That is adulteration. For the longest time in India, the conversation was we have a problem with counterfeiting, what we call falsified medicine in India. We call spurious. That's what our law says. Why would anybody want to counterfeit a product that is already cheap? Would you want to do that? Counterfeiters make a product, a replica of a product, because they want to sell that as an expensive product. A drug under patent that sells for a lot of money, there is an economic incentive for you to counterfeit that. If you look at pricing in India, our drugs are already priced at a very, very affordable level compared to the global system. I'm not talking about the more expensive oncology medicine, but generally, right? Why would anybody want to counterfeit a medicine that already sells for 50 rupees? That makes no sense to me, right? But the Indian industry has developed this narrative saying that there's a problem with counterfeiting in India. We don't have a counterfeiting problem, we have a substandard problem. So this is a nuance. It's very difficult to explain this to people because we don't understand the difference between counterfeiting and adulteration. It's more important just to focus on the quality of outcomes, right? If I am a person who's been prescribed medicine for my diabetes, and if my medicine doesn't work, whether it's counterfeited or substandard, at the end of the day, I am actually losing, right? I'm not getting the benefit of spending that money and buying my medicine. Yes, to the lawmakers, to people who write our statutes, to the people who do research in this area, this distinction is really, really important, because the company Global Pharma that made this eye drops was found to have this drug-resistant bacteria in the United States. Do you honestly think that the company doesn't make product for India? Where is the recall of that product in India? The reason I'm pointing this out to you is because these things go to the intent of what the regulator does and why it does what it does, right? It's the job of the regulator to say, look, if our product caused this adverse event in the Gambia, let me also find out whether this manufacturer is making this product with a different label, or many a times what happens in India is that the larger pharma companies subcontract this stuff to smaller companies and they put their label on it, right? Is that happening with this particular manufacturing facility? But unless you do that, how do you know?
What's tougher, flagging these issues now or whistleblowing against Ranbaxy?
Oh, this is much, much tougher. Much tougher. The reason I say that is because in the Ranbaxy situation, right, the law and the regulation worked. I mean, my name didn't even come into the public domain until the case was resolved. Can you imagine that happening in India?
Is it tough taking on issues, that are not conforming to the public imagination these days?
The challenge is that people relate to politics a lot more easily than the kind of issues that I work at, right? Explaining the complexity of why things are the way they are, it's a little bit involved. It does, like, even with medicine, people relate more to pricing. Why do I have to pay so much money, right? They don't think about the fact that, it's not just about money. It's also about the fact that, whatever little money that you've gotten, If the medicine that you buy doesn't work, what good is it?
Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr.
Thank you again for
Thakur.
the opportunity to speak.